Well, good evening everyone and welcome to AM Insights. We welcome our COVID-safe live audience. We welcome people who are streaming at home, and of course we welcome people who are watching this on live catch-up later. Before we begin, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional owners of country throughout Australia. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Tonight we're coming to you live from Gadigal country. Tonight we shine a light on music programming. Who chooses what we listen to on the radio or when we watch TV? And how does that choice get made? To tell us all about it, we're talking to Dan Bessant, someone I've known for a very long time, who's enjoyed a long career as a programmer for radio and TV. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Good to be here. Actually,
yes.
Can I start by saying just really quickly that when you called me a couple of weeks ago to come and do this, I thought, yeah, of course, I want to, give a bit of a favour or a bit of a bit in return from a podcast that we did. And then off the back of that, yesterday I was doing a little bit of a walk, a COVID walk that I do at the moment, and I actually got a little bit emotional in a sense. And the reason for that was that you gave me an opportunity to think about, the last 20 or 30 years, and also this place of AIM. So I just wanted to start by saying thanks for having me, because it's actually quite special, and I didn't realise that probably until I started thinking about it.
Well, we give you the opportunity to look back over your entire career, Dan. It's not over yet, but...
Hope not.
So, let's actually rewind to the very beginning of your career.
Okay.
How did you get into radio?
I'm going to start quite early, and I'll try not to take up the full
start
session
as early
with
as you
that.
like.
Okay, yeah, so how did I start?
Birth?
Yeah, that happened. That went okay. It was probably the first part, and I guess why I'm saying this is music really has been my life until now, and it all started probably in primary school, where when they hand out the musical instruments, it's like, hey, you get to try your musical instrument or what you want to do. And I wanted to play the saxophone. So like any budding player, I figured I need to play this brass instrument, which it's not. It's a woodwind instrument. So 10 years later, I'm playing the tuba and going through that and doing university with the tuba and DJing in nightclubs to make my way through what I thought was my career. I wasn't sure which way to go yet.
So you imagined you were going to be a musician?
Yeah, a musician or perhaps a conductor as well. I really enjoy conducting, which I kind of ended up doing in a funny way in television and radio. I kind of see programming as conducting a lot. But then what happened was the late nights started getting later. I got into my teenage years a bit, and I started to lose a little bit of interest on the classical music side of things. I've still got an appreciation for it, but I started to lose the interest. And so it was actually an ad in the newspaper. This was back in Perth. I saw this ad in the newspaper for a Academy of Radio that was starting up for the very first time. And I was 18 at the time. And I thought, you know what? I want to get a normal job. I want to get a real 9-to-5 job. And so I'm going to give this thing a bit of a bash and see how I go. So Phil Yude was the guy that started this academy, the first one over there. And I called Phil and I said, this looks amazing, I've got to do your course. And he said, well, you've got to be 21, so sorry, no. And you've told me you've got no money, so no. So I ended up not leaving him alone, basically. I bugged him and I bugged him and I bugged him. And he finally gave in. I painted the inside of his house. I gave him my car, my Celica, which I was quite fond of at the time. But it got me into radio through this course. So I did the course. It took me about 6 months to do a course. Basically, it was a 2-year course that they cram all the bits that you really need to know into 6 months. And then I couldn't get a job. So I spent 6 months trying to get my first job in radio. So I'm not one of those guys that jumps in and gets a great job on air or something and then ends up away you go on Metro. I got my first job in Carnarvon over in the west of WA. It was a town of 12,000 people, and did that, and then travelled around Australia.
They have a radio station in Carnarvon?
They do, they do. Still, I think 666LN. It was Yamaji Media at the time. It was an Indigenous owned station.
Okay.
It was a great community as well. Actually, we had a lot of fun. But I was there for about 6 months. Travelled around. My wife as well did all this with me, so it was pretty cool that she agreed to go to Carnarvon, Esperance, Bunbury, Townsville. And then that's when Nova came along.
So before we get to Nova, I think it's worth noting that it's something that people don't realise about radio, that if you want to have a career in radio, you often have to move from town to town because the opportunities pop up in all sorts of funny places, or you're offered, you know, a promotion, but you have to go to Rockhampton or Hobart or whatever, and so you constantly have to move.
Exactly.
I don't know of any other industry where you're required to move cities multiple
so
times.
Yeah. Look, there's maybe not as much of it now as what there was back in the 90s or the 80s because there's a lot of networking happening.
Yep.
Which does mean that there's less jobs then as well, I guess, in a point. But it still does happen, and there are still, you know, great local community radio stations and commercial radio stations happening throughout. There might not be as many roles in those places as there used to be, but they still have their breakfast team and they've still got their sales and marketing team and the likes as well. So, yeah, it's not always just straight into Sydney and away you go. It does happen, but.
So in those stations, what was your role? You were music director or announcer?
I was everything to start. Yeah.
Right.
So I guess when you're doing the small places, you're the announcer, the breakfast announcer, the music director, the producer. So I learned, you know, the tools of the trade was a great way to learn. You know, I was making commercials on the old cart machines and I was splicing tape. I don't know if you still do that for fun anymore or whether that's completely gone, but yeah, splicing tape to piece together, you know, full shows, you know, Barry Bissell's Top 40 Australia or something I think it was at the time, and a country show on the Sunday or whatever. So you did everything. I was the prize patrol. I used to go out and hand out the icy cold cans of Coca-Cola after my shift. So it was a bit of fun, yeah.
So the advent of Nova was a big moment in Australian radio because prior to that you really only had two commercial radio stations in most markets, which was the Austereo station and the Triple M station, both Austereo stations, but a pop top 40 station and a rock station. And then along comes Nova. What was the original concept behind Nova?
We didn't know originally before we started. That was the exciting part, I think, was the discovery. You know, there were on a content sort of side of things, there were 3 or 4 of us that got to start. My biggest thing that I'll never forget was getting that phone call to say, we've got this new radio station that's launching in Sydney. Do you want to come and play music and build this thing together with a couple of other select others? And that was amazing. So I jumped on the plane and got here, and it was literally a piece of paper. I think Paul Thompson, a big name in Australian radio, and ran Austereo, and then finally got this commercial radio station called, well, it didn't have a name at the time, but got this piece of paper for $155 million to say you're allowed to broadcast now. And this is without any of, obviously, the deals in place with the labels or all the other things that come to run. So we did that, and then I remember sitting around a little room at somebody's house. Dean Buchanan was the group program director for Nova and for DMG, and we're sitting there. It's like, okay, so we've got this piece of paper. What are we going to do in a sense? And so it was looking at you know, research. Obviously, we did a lot of research to work out what is the target market, where's the opportunity. We started getting this feedback about never more than 2 ads in a row, or commercial radio plays too many ads, and so that's well, what if we just played some short bite-sized ads? And so that was that strategy there. And the other thing that we started to get back was that top 40 traditional radio, I guess is the way you could look at it, was a gap in the market. So what we had a rock station, like you said, and we had a pop station, and what was missing was and we had alternative station as well in Triple J. Yeah. But what we were missing was a station that actually played it all. And you had, at the time, I think you had Eminem and Fatboy Slim and The Offspring, you know, in the charts, and Moby. No one was actually playing either any of it, and from a commercial radio sense. They certainly weren't playing it together back to back. And that, I think one of the things that we sort of embraced was called train wreck scheduling. So it's putting The Offspring next to Shaggy, next to
Eminem.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I remember about Nova was that it was, because I was working in a record company at the time, as you know, and there was a lot of music we couldn't get on the air at that time because it coincided with a lot of hip hop crossing into the mainstream in America. So you had an artist like, Puff Daddy / P Diddy / whatever he's called now.
Yeah.
Who was huge in America, but no station was playing him in Australia, or Usher, or Pink, or there was a whole slew of artists that were kind of out of that urban stable.
That's right.
What used to be called urban. And Nova came along and started playing it all, but they were also playing, punk rock bands and this everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was very refreshing to have somewhere else to get your records played.
Yeah, it was an exciting time. I think some great memories there, and some great times that we had with the labels and the likes as well. I think
Okay, so we're just gonna pause on that concept for a while, because I think anyone watching this would be interested to know, how does a radio station make the decision to add a song to the playlist? Because I think we all know that there's a world of songs out there that are being made every day, and the record companies are highly motivated to get those songs on the radio, because radio airplay equals sales.
Yes.
More or less.
Yeah.
So, but you guys, from your perspective, don't want to add that many records, because it's not in the interest of the audience to keep adding new songs every day.
That's right. There's
too
a real
confusing.
art to it. There's a science to it.
Yeah, and you got to balance familiar with unfamiliar and different tempos and all of those.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
factors.
And radio's got a different objective, I guess, in the sense of revenue, making money, and like you say, having a big audience. And whether you're government funded or commercial, I guess you want an audience. So it's about, well, how can we actually achieve the largest size audience, and then how can we have them stay around for the longest period of time?
So, I think of it, it's like a sort of grand cricket game where on one side you've got these forces of the record companies wanting their song added to desperately wanting it. And on the other hand, you've got the radio stations that kind of, they're at the crease batting everyone away, but they're really not that interested in adding, maybe you add four songs a week or whatever, but you're not that interested in adding a lot of songs.
Yeah,
so how do you manage that? And just for those that don't know, the record companies will do things like take you to dinner, take you to lunch, fly you to New York, take you out on a yacht. They'll do whatever they think could possibly influence your decision making.
Yeah.
And you can either accept that generosity or not. But either way, they'll keep throwing it at you.
It was relentless.
It must have been terrible.
But it was fun as well. I mean,
So, how does that process work? I mean, firstly, how do you decide what gets played on the radio? And
Sure.
how do you resist all of that effort?
Yeah. There's a couple of good questions there. And I think which one to go with first? I guess personally, the way that I handle and I'd like to think that a lot of programmers will, is it is a professional job. You've got a job to do, and you've got targets to hit, you've got KPIs like any other business. And so to make a decision needs to be based on what is the best thing for the business, and also what is the honest thing to do, what's the authentic, appropriate thing to do as well. So we had a lot of fun with the labels from a radio point of view, and television as well. But at the same time, it was best to be upfront right from the start and say, okay, well, look, let's have this fun, and we're going to build great relationships, and it'll be an amazing way for us to experience music together and see where we go. But for it not to influence the playlist at the end of the day, and just to have those conversations and be quite open and honest about that.
And did you ever feel embarrassed about the level of generosity that was being sent your way, or did?
Extremely appreciative. And now looking back, why did I say no to a couple? I mean, oh my God! In fact, I think actually even Nicole, who's in the audience today, I think I remember at one point being offered, and this might not have been directly from you, but I think you might have been there at the time. But it was overseas trips for myself and my wife to experience, bands on the Mississippi, or going to London, and I turned them down. And then I guess what I'm saying there is it came back to, actually no, it didn't come back to being doing the right thing. It came back to just being too bloody busy, and having my priority being deliver the best radio format and results that we possibly can. Looking back on it now, bloody take that trip.
Yes, because the way you'd look at it, I guess, is the trip won't make you do your job any better.
absolutely not.
It will be a fun trip, but you won't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, there were some great fun trips, and I've got great memories of, things like lunches in Paris and missing the plane because we had to go to a candle store in Paris and having to stay there a few more days and
Terrible.
Going to where was it? Singapore? No, it was Tokyo. And I don't think I've ever said this. I interviewed somebody and didn't press record. So I had a great trip, but didn't get the interview. I'm sure it's happened to everybody. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but let's hope that. Or it can't happen tonight because we're live, so that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, that's that one side. And I guess it was a long way of saying that really enjoying the experiences. I wish I did actually say yes to them more where it was appropriate because they would have been great life experiences, and it was okay to say yes if it didn't impact the results for the channel and the station.
And I mean, I'm sure a young artist listening to that would say, well, that's all dreadfully unfair because, I don't get to take Dan to Paris and I don't get that access to these people that make these critical decisions. So, is there a sort of sense of equity and fairness about the process, do you think? Do you still end up adding the song that is the best song?
190%. No, you know what? And I guess it's going to be different for different people, and everybody works their stations and their business differently. But what I would like to think is that you are making that call based on what's best for the station. Now, that might not necessarily be the subjectively best song, but it's what's going to be right for that station that they need at that time. And I guess that's a long way of getting to the answer for the other part of the question of why.
Well, what's the process?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think look, there's so many moving parts, and the way that I always treated music programming was like a creative mathematics and a little bit of science thrown in. I never thought that I would use algebra in radio, but I did because you would create clocks, and if you want to have a certain rotation on your songs because you need to have it exposed by a certain way. That's how you get to understand how many spaces you might have. A radio station might have a time spent listening of, say, 30 minutes each day. So if someone comes for 30 minutes, you want to put forward the best representation of that station that you can in that 30 minutes from a music point of view. Obviously, you've got content and celebrity and personality and that to come with that as well. But you want to put forward that best 30 minutes that you possibly can.
Whatever the 30 minutes might end up being.
That's right. And then you've got to balance brand and credibility with what most people actually really do want to listen to. So these are all the factors that come into play before you're actually looking at, okay, is this actually a really good song, no matter where it comes from. And so with that, I guess what I'm saying is the way that stations might balance is they might say, well, we do want a little bit of credibility. And quite often they'll do it through their branding, their marketing, and the talent they have. American Rosso back in the day with Nova was a great example, and on Triple J before that. That brought that little bit of edge and that creativity to it. But the times that Nova did really well and the times that Channel V did really well were when they were playing the big polished commercial hits. You look back at Channel V in its, if you want to call it its heyday, and you had personalities like your Jabber or your Andrew G and your Yumi Steins and Jane Gazos, and they all brought a lot of credibility. And then you went off and you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on Big Day Out filming and all these great festivals that used to be around. That was all for brand because unfortunately, from a viewing point of view, people don't watch that on the big scale of things. So what would happen was you'd get the brand credibility going that way, but the music you'd be playing would be Robbie Williams, Madonna, Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake. You get the idea as a whole. With Nova, there was a little bit more of an edge. So you would say, okay, well, we'll bring in a song every once in a while that's going to provide that little bit of spark or spice. We know it doesn't research well. We know that there's going to be people that are going to hear that and go, that's not my favourite song, see you later. But we thought there was value in that. And again, as a music lover, I'd love to be able to say, oh no, you pick the best song and it doesn't matter. But when you're piecing together something that you need a lot of audience, that comes into it. Before you get to, is this the best song? And there's some great stories about where that comes in. And Triple J, of course, is another platform for that. Obviously, they still want audience as well. And so there is still a certain pop sensibility, but again, one step more removed. So there's more opportunity. And that is before you get to streaming.
Well, I was just about to say, yeah, I mean, it used to be that I think music programming was purely, does this song work or not for my particular objective today. Now I think there's a lot of data that's derived from, like you're looking at streaming data, for example, and saying, well, if this is getting a lot of streams, then we should probably look at this track.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And look, I think there's always going to be room for curated hubs, whether that's commercial radio or Spotify in a way does curate as well as allow everything to come along. So I think it's a great way of looking at, well, what is the cream of the crop? What is rising to the top in those places, like you say? Shazam even is a good example. There's so many different ways that you can look at it and see, well, what is working.
And do the record companies or the pluggers come to you and say, look, this is doing really well on Shazam, or this is doing really well on Spotify? So they use that data?
Yeah, absolutely.
In case you hadn't noticed it?
Yeah, for sure, yeah. And that's always a great help, I think, as well. And I think, look, that's the other point to that, because I guess there's the major labels and they're bringing in, I don't know how many now, but at the time they might have been bringing in, 5 or 6 records each. And then you've got all of the unsigned artists, and I would get a truckload of unsigned artists coming through. And then you've got some of the more independent releases as well that would come through. So yeah, you might be looking at 50 songs to add.
A week.
You might have room for 3, maybe 4, maybe 1, maybe none. And so it's about working out, well, what's going to do that. And then also, the other thing that adds complexity is every song has a different life cycle and hit cycle. And so what's going through a programmer's mind is, if I play this song, which might be a beautifully written song, and it might be something that is more on an acoustic side of things, or really well crafted. Maybe it's the first time you listen to a Led Zeppelin song or something, as opposed to something which is instant and pop and it's going to be straight up and then straight back out. You need to balance all of that out as well.
And let's put ourselves in the shoes of an unsigned artist who just is hoping to get their big break, and they're part of that big pile of unsigned acts that submit their songs every week. Is there any chance that you will even, as a programmer, listen to those songs, let alone add them? Does that ever happen?
I can only speak from previous experience for myself. I would like to think that it does, yeah. And I also would like to think that, and I know that it has happened a lot of the time in the past, that an unsigned artist can make commercial radio or mainstream radio, Triple J. It's harder perhaps with the competitive landscape on commercial radio now than what it used to be, but it does still happen. And I think, I also think that maybe it doesn't matter as much, because there's other opportunities out there as well now where you can actually create your own groundswell. And there was a long time where I say, oh no, you need commercial radio for that. Obviously times have changed in that sense as well. It does still happen though, and there's things like, I got personally excited about times when I'd get this blank CD and I didn't really look to see what it was, and I'd put it into the CD player and listen to it and go, wow, this thing is amazing. And there were a couple of times I actually ran it down to the studio and said, get this thing on, this is great, just play it, it's from this artist. One was Blue Juice before they were signed. Another was Sneaky Sound System.
So it does
and there
happen.
were plenty that happened along the way. I mean, yeah, and then you've got things like John Butler Trio and Flume and those sort of artists that, and some of my references might be a bit dated because it's been a little while since I've been pushing the buttons in that space. But yeah, it does happen.
So you went from a successful career in music programming on radio to programming for television.
Yeah.
For Foxtel, initially in music TV, but then more broadly other arts channels and creative channels.
Yeah, entertainment channels, yeah.
Is it a very different space? Is TV, I mean, let's just think about music TV versus radio for a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, are they very different in the way you program?
Yeah, they were. And the reason I say they were is because there's not as many music TV channels around, unfortunately, and even free-to-air. It's a tough thing, music on television, which we might get to, but they are programmed differently for that reason as well. I think the other thing is TV is a big moving, slow-moving beast, and that's what I learned very quickly moving from one to the other, was You can't just run down and say, "Quick, get this song on the screen." It didn't happen that way, and I think overall your planning, you had to be really well planned out with television. So you would spend, we would have a 12-month plan more so, which was pretty solid in television. With radio, there were times we were going, let's change tomorrow because we've just come up with a great idea. Let's just move, and we'd all just be in there and change. So it was very dynamic. It was also a bit loose maybe as well because of that, but I think that was quite different. So when it came to selection, music selection, it did differ in a way that the viewing habits are different, and the way that you might influence or present the music was different. So an example might be with commercial radio, you might be looking for that perfect flow right the way through a particular period of time, 30 minutes. Now, what you might do with television, and what happens a lot, is you might say, this artist actually does really well. And so you might actually play half an hour or an hour of that artist because there's going to, the name.
Just play a block of Beyonce.
Exactly, yeah. The name could actually pull the numbers for you. So there's differences like that. Live music as well. I mean, live music wasn't very strong with radio as well when you look at the numbers. Does it sound great? Do we all want to be part of live music? Absolutely. It's, that's why we do it from a passionate point of view. But the numbers for television in particular, like I said, we would do big day outs and amazing, and and unless it was actually a really big one-off event, and I can think of a handful, Sound Relief was one. They didn't rate as well on the television, and unfortunately, that's why you don't see as much of that, on the free-to-airs as well.
So in the time that you were programming for radio and then television, along came streaming and along came YouTube and, a whole slew of other similar services.
Yeah.
How has that changed the space? Like,
massively.
Do people still listen to the radio and watch music TV? They really don't watch music TV so much, do they?
Not so much. Now, there was actually still quite high viewership, but I think the thing with television is when you're comparing music to sport and to movies and drama and news, there's not really a comparison to that sense. So even though the numbers were big and there were still great viewers for music television, on a scale from a business sense, it wasn't as big. Radio is still the bigger player in that space, absolutely. And even, the numbers compared between a Channel V and what that would pull compared to a Today or a Hit or a Nova or any is quite different, yeah. I think that there's room and there will be, I think those businesses will survive, but what they're going to be is going to be very different, and we're already seeing that changing now, both television and radio. Because of streaming, because of...
Yeah, but I mean, our audience might not realise that there was a time where you couldn't effectively program your own radio station, whereas you can do that.
That's right, yeah.
You can make a playlist, you can make endless playlists, you can exist entirely within your own musical universe all day.
Absolutely.
But I mean, that wasn't the case, and so I suppose the technology has overwhelmed what used to be a very good business model, because no one was competing with radio for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. What radio can still bring and why it will remain successful, I think, for some time, even though you see radio now working in the streaming space as they should, and podcasts and looking at their business model, advertising revenue does continue to decline there as well. What it does do though is it creates community, and so you can create a playlist that plays all your favourite music on Spotify, and that's great for you, and that's happy days. You can actually share those playlists, obviously, as well, and you can find something that is quite entertaining, but it might be more an inward experience. And I think that's the great thing that radio has, is that you've still got personality. You've still got somebody actually creating what is, for a majority of people, their favourite style of music. So I think that there is and there still will be that room for well-curated, entertaining content.
Yeah, one of the things I realised when I was working in record companies was that there's really two types of people in the world. There's people who are obsessive music fans who are really sensitive to what they're listening to and frankly would rather curate their own music listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then there's everybody else, and everybody else is most of the population. And those people are not that fussy about what they listen to. They just want something on in the car or in the kitchen while they're making the kids' lunch. And so for that vast, probably majority of people, radio is a pretty good solution.
That's right.
Whereas, I mean, there's people like me that frankly can't stand listening to the radio because I just don't like most of the things they're playing. So,
Yeah, that's
it
right.
kind of depends on your level of music
again.
knowledge or music,
Yeah, I totally
what your taste
agree.
is.
Yeah. And I think, look, that's the other thing. It is so segmented now, and myself, I don't listen to a lot of radio myself anymore, either for a lot of those same reasons. And I like to listen to podcasts
And tuba music.
That's right. Yeah.
Before we wrap this up, I'm curious. You're now working in sort of leadership coaching.
Yeah, personal actually more than organisational. Yeah.
And I'm fascinated because you've observed the top leaders in the music space and in the media space over many years. Is there a management style that is typical to these industries? Do leaders and managers operate differently in this space to the rest of the community?
Good question. I don't know whether I could compare, in a sense, I don't think I will compare how they are compared to the rest of the community, but what I will say is that there is, I think I've probably seen quite a style or a trend over the years that I'm quite excited to see that it's changing and where it's going. And I think what I would suggest I've experienced a lot of through my time is what kind of feels like old school management style, hierarchical management style. And look, this probably is happening across multiple businesses as well. I think across media, there was a bit of a boys' club going on for quite a long period of time as well. And that wasn't right. And I think, look, there's still work to be done there, and that's starting to change. And equality on things as well is starting to change. The one thing that I think there's really a difference now as to where media management used to be is people are becoming more, they're becoming more people orientated, and I think that's a really, really good thing. If I think back to what 90s radio used to be, it was ruthless, it really was. And look, for myself, I wasn't necessarily a part of that, but I've heard a lot of the stories of how it was and the positive impact that competition had in the market. But it was quite ruthless, and it was, there were manuals like Thick Face, Black Heart, which is about, really do what you need to do with a straight face, do it with honesty and integrity, but you've got to win. Winning was the game, and the Art of War and those sort of marketing books as well. So, and
just to be clear, Austereo used to hand out the Art of War as a manual.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Which is, for anyone who's bothered to read it, it's got some fairly brutal advice about how to manage people.
It was brutal. Absolutely. And that's it. And to a degree, for the time it was working, was it right? I think now we know that it's, maybe there's better ways of leading team and building culture. But at the time, that's what it was. And so what it was it more so results driven by a strategy. A well thought out and very clever strategy to get the result that you want to get. No matter what you have to do to get that result, you must win. And what I've seen a lot of, especially this year, I mean, COVID, has changed a lot of leadership styles, I think. And what we're seeing is empathy from leaders that we might not have seen before. And I've experienced that, in numerous occasions. Empathy, more social awareness. More emotional awareness, and that's a really good thing. I'm quite excited for that.
Yeah, and I think the flip side of that, or an extension of that, is the focus on people's mental health and well-being, because it's documented that people working in the music industry, and musicians particularly, suffer from depression and anxiety disproportionately to the rest of the population. So, and I think that's only now being recognised. And so I suppose those shifts in management style are well overdue, because they impact people's well-being in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think having that. I mean, look, it should always be that way. But I think, like you say, that there is that through the music industry. There are people that are struggling, and there's some great support there. And I guess I would say first and foremost, if you are going through that, to speak to somebody and get that whether it's a friend or a colleague or some proper assistance. But I think it is great that managers are really starting to lead with that. And look, there's things along the way, not just in music, but in life in general as well, where we're seeing, you know, Are You OK Day started as a great thing, and now people actually say it with comfort and with caring, and it's not like, oh, I better say it or whatever. It's like people actually really care and do ask and are looking out for each other more. So I'm a pretty positive and optimistic person as well, and I think it's nice to see that the world is looking out for each other in that sort of sense as well, from a mental health point of view, as much as being a results-driven world.
Because when you look at the music industry, perhaps particularly through a historic lens, I think and media and radio and broadcasting generally, it was a culture where those things were not valued and
they were seen as a weakness.
You know, there was this idea that you had to be a brutal, tough, horrible person in order to succeed.
Yeah. And that's changing, and that's great. I'm really happy to see that is that approach has, I think, others might think otherwise, but I think that is changing, and that's a really, really good thing to see.
Well, I've waited to the very end to pay you a compliment, Dan, but you've always been a nice guy, and you've never done any of those things. So it's nice to see that nice people succeed, you know?
No, I appreciate it. And look, it was so nice to get the call, and you know, obviously you did our podcast as well for the Reset Hub.
Yes, Dan interviewed me a few months ago, so I'm returning the favour.
Nice to
vice
return
versa.
the favour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, please thank Dan Bessant. Thanks for joining us on AM Insights, and we'll see you again soon.